This is our 32nd lesson on the biblical flood, the study of the biblical flood. And I'm Marion Fox, the speaker. We want to look at other phenomena explained by cosmic ice. Now, understand, cosmic ice is near absolute zero. It's very cold, around 459 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, about 273 below zero Celsius. On the Kelvin scale, it would be 0 degrees Kelvin. The ice wasn't quite that cold, but it was just pretty close to that cold. In northern Canada and Alaska, there are thousands of lakes that are oriented in a northwest to southeast axis. And we can look at those. Zoll, and of course, this is in the book. Those of you who are in the class, you'll have the book, and I'll make the book available later for other people. But these oriented lakes by thousands lie on a common northwest-southeast axis, a phenomenon that intrigues scientists. This is all. If my memory is right, this quote is from National Geographic magazine. Okay, and they had pictures of them in that magazine. These lakes could have been formed by the impact of large chunks of ice that would have formed craters. So right here, the orientation of them is very interesting, the way they're oriented. And we also have what's called a Pingo. That's an Eskimo word. This is a chunk of ice that has earth on top of it. And this ice, this is a picture of a Pingo. And there's some other pictures of Pingos. Now, a very interesting thing about these Pingos is there usually is a hollowed out wedge or little lake next to them. And so these are chunks of ice underneath this, soil on top, and there's ice underneath it and under this. Now this ice will eventually melt, and when it does, this is forms a little lake in here. And so we have these Pingos, they're called Pingos. The tops are beginning to collapse. The explanation for them is very interesting. The scientists, the way they explained them, I don't think the explanation fits. But right here, we have these hollowed out lakes, and near them, and if a chunk of ice came in, and take my mouse, and as it comes in at an angle, and I believe it would have come in at an angle as the planet that caused the flood in my model came in at an angle above the ecliptic plane, and the ice then would come in at an angle and burr out big chunks of ice, and they would then bulldoze up dirt on top of them. And I believe this is probably what happened. Okay, here's some more Pingos, Northwest Territories in Canada, and the Eskimo words. Now here's a link to the scientist explanation of Pingos, and I would you can get this on the internet and see it. Here's another one, another link to it, and the little sources that you can get these and write them down and go to them. I'm not going to spend time on them. Okay. Cosmic ice could also explain the quick freezing of the animals and plants and mummification of both plants and animals. Now, when it gets super dry, real dry, what will happen is the moisture comes out of it due to sublimation, process called sublimation. And sublimation is when water, H2O water, goes directly from a solid, from ice, to a vapor to gas. It doesn't go through the liquid state. And we see this in freezer burn. But this would mummify both plants and animals. This extreme cold wouldn't allow it to go through the liquid state. According to this, again, these sources are in the book that those of you who are in the class have. The forests are mummified, according to Francis, man whose last name is Francis. The wood is dry and somewhat compressed. So something has compressed the wood. That would be very easily explained with ice laying on top of the wood, but otherwise unchanged, with many trees reaching more than 100 feet in height. So here are trees up in the Arctic region, what is now the Arctic region, that are 100 feet tall. That's a pretty tall tree in that region. Right now, the trees that grow there would be something like just a few feet tall, and they're real small. They're not very large at all. Now, cosmic ice that fell from the sky could also explain the broken legs and pelvic bones of Bershaboka River mammoth. And this complete mammoth body was found in Siberia's Bershaboka River. He had been caught up by some terrific force and carried some miles away from his feeding ground. He suffered a broken leg and pelvic bones, and then in the kneeling position froze to death at the hottest time of the year, according to Hapgood. Now, Hapgood's book, there are two books by Hapgood that I cite. I have both of them. But Hapgood's book is endorsed, and the preface of it, the foreword, I believe, is written by Albert Einstein, and he recommended the book. Albert Einstein did. But Hapgood talked about these Bershaboka mammoths, Bershaboka River, in the Bershaboka River. Here's a picture of the mammoth, and they've got him here, and that's what he looked like. And so that's him. That's that mammoth in a museum, and I guess they keep it in a controlled environment where it won't decay. When I was in Russia, I did not see it. Okay. A complete mammoth body was found near Siberia's Bershaboka River. He had been caught up by some terrific force and carried some miles away. Now, this is, of course, Hapgood on page 60, 1960. A man named Tomikov, and he talked about the Bershaboka River mammoth, and he said it died of injuries received. The pelvis, a forefoot, and a few ribs were found broken. So something broke the ribs, as well as an indication of a strong hemorrhage and also of suffocation. Now, the death by suffocation is proved by the erected male genital, a condition inexplicable in the other way. This is one way they know a male has been suffocated, and that will happen under suffocation. But Tomikov says that this mammoth suffocated, and so he didn't die of natural causes. He was suffocated. That's the proof of it. Very interesting. Now, my model will explain how he suffocated. We'll see that in just a minute. Large amounts of ice could weigh heavily upon the mammoth and cause it to have broken bones. If the ice came from the sky through the windows of heaven, it could cause hemorrhaging as it struck the mammoth. If the temperature of the ice was near absolute zero, negative 273 degrees Celsius or 459 degrees Fahrenheit, those are approximations. There's a little fraction in there, but it's approximately that value. It would liquefy the oxygen in the air and suffocate the mammoth. If it got that cold, the oxygen will turn to liquid, and that, of course, would suffocate the mammoth. He couldn't breathe because the air would be liquid. The mammoth air would, and so that would explain this. And of course, the hemorrhaging, if chunks of ice were hitting him from the sky, that would cause a great deal of hemorrhaging and cause him to bleed. Right? But this liquefying of the oxygen by that cold temperature, that temperature probably at least 350, 360 degrees below 0 Celsius. That's what they think that comet ice and comets is in the rings of the planets. Here is a frozen baby mammoth, and so it's frozen. And so they found a lot of these mammoths. Now they're attempting right now, and I'll provide this for you as a link for your further study if you want. What they're doing is they're trying to reclaim some mammoths. They want to resurrect the woolly mammoths. It's a video of it, and I just recently got this, so I put it as a link in here. And I predict if they do, they're trying to, I don't know whether they're trying to clone it or they're trying to take frozen semen and impregnate an Indian elephant, a female Indian elephant with it. I think that's what they're trying to do. And if they're thinking they may get it done the next couple of years. Of course, the gestation period for an elephant, I think, is 2 years. And so they're working on it right now. But I predict if they do get this elephant, this mammoth elephant cross, I predict it won't be able to stand cold weather. Elephants can't handle cold weather, and that just shoots their whole system down. And so this may be an eye opener for them. I almost hope they accomplish this, and they may be using artificial insemination to do it with the frozen semen from a male elephant, from a male mammoth. Micrometeorites in Arctic ice, Antarctic ice. Now, what we have here is in Antarctica, there are micrometeorites, small meteorites that appear to be unmelted. Irregular particles appear to be unmelted and have similarities with the fine-grained matrix of primitive. Now, what this is, if these meteorites haven't melted when they come through the atmosphere, they must have been extremely cold, or they could have been enveloped in chunks of ice that did melt as it went through the atmosphere and left these unmelted meteorites, particles. So very interesting. And so I would say they could easily have come in with ice. Much of the ice, the rings of the planets like Saturn are ice rings they've now discovered. Most of it's ice, but there are chunks of dust and other particles in their fine-grained matrix, and dust and grain-like, sand-like particles. And there are also some chunks of rocks too. Since these micrometeorites are unmelted, they might have been encapsulated in the cosmic ice when they entered the Earth's atmosphere. That's my theory. It's my hypothesis. Only cosmic ice with a temperature of approximately negative 459 degrees Fahrenheit, or negative 273 Celsius, a little bit warmer than that, but not a lot, would prevent the melting of these micrometeorites as they encounter the Earth's atmosphere. Because what happens when they come through the atmosphere at high rates of speed, they'll get very hot and they'll melt. These particles then show signs of great heat. Selinger discusses the physics of meteoric descent into the Earth's atmosphere. And I would, if you want to follow that up more closely, you can see it on pages 524 through 535. It gets into a little bit of heavy mathematics, but if you've had the background, you can look at it. Okay. Most of the cratering of the Earth has been obscured by erosion. The Earth is cratered. A lot of people don't know that. This is something that they've discovered in the last few years. Wind, water, and ice melting and drift or till would be from glaciers. These have obscured the craters on the Earth. And so we do have cratering on the Earth. But there are craters on the Earth, and we're going to lay this out as further evidence of my model. If the craters are filled with sediment, and we have craters that are filled with sediment, they occurred either during or before the flood, assuming the flood deposited all the sedimentary rock. So with my model here now, the sedimentary rock, most of it was deposited by the flood. That's my claim. There are craters in all levels of the sedimentary rocks. Very interesting. And again, my model will explain these because they came from the rings of the planet that caused the flood. Ice and rocks in the craters that cratered. Now, here's some impact craters in Africa. So we have craters, and these are big impact craters, and these little circles are the impact craters. Now we're going to show something else that happened with regard to these craters at a later time. I don't know whether next week or the following week, but I'll be doing that very shortly. But here, impact craters, there's in Saudi Arabia, and of course, and there's in Egypt. There's one right there in Egypt, and there's some bigger ones. I think this is probably Libya over here. Okay. Now, look here. Here's some more craters in Asia. So we see craters here all along, and these are craters, and they're filled with sedimentary rock. These craters are. Here's some more craters in Australia, and again, they're filled with rock as well, sedimentary rock by and large, most of them are. Here's some in Europe, up in Europe, and there's a bunch of them right in here, notice. And we see them here and here in France, and I believe that's Germany there. Okay. Now, here's craters in the United States, and these are craters, but you notice they're in a line. They form a line here. And right here's a big crater, the form of the Chesapeake Bay. This crater come in at an angle and cut through the mountain ranges here, and the Cumberland Gap in here was cut by the object that formed this crater that formed the Chesapeake Bay. So the Cumberland Gap, where many of the settlers went through to the west. The Appalachian Mountains were kind of a barrier, but this Cumberland Gap was formed by this object. It's called a bolide, B-O-L-I-D-E, by scientists, and that's a Greek word for something thrown. Okay, but we see all these craters. There's a big crater in Oklahoma. There's one in Ames, Oklahoma, but it's buried by sediment, and near Ames, Oklahoma, A-M-E-S. But this is probably maybe about crater number one right in here somewhere is that crater, probably right in here. And so that's we have a lot of craters in the United States and Canada, notice, up here in Canada, and there's Hudson's Bay, okay? There's one in Alaska right here as well. Yeah. There's in South America, notice there's not as many in South America, but there are some in South America as well. Okay. This would be in Brazil here, and these two are in Argentina, and this is on the border of Chile and Argentina. So we have several there in Argentina and Chile, and also in Brazil. The 5 and 7 and 1 and 8 are in Brazil. Here's a crater in Antarctica, and here's a large crater here, and this was formed in Antarctica. So we have craters here, but we have lots of ice down here. Now, looking at the craters, we see a lot of them are in the northern hemisphere, notice. And right here's your equator right in here. So most of them are here, but we do have some lined up here in a line. Now, notice here, the North America, if you go straight south, it'll be ocean. So this stretches at an angle. But the craters, there's a lot of them up here, and there's a lot in Europe and in Australia across here. I want to give you my hypothesis on this. The claim is made, the present claim, and it's being shot down by some scientists. The claim is made that there was an impact crater at the Yucatan Peninsula that formed a huge crater, and Chicxulub crater. And the Chicxulub crater is supposed to have been what did away with the dinosaurs. Okay, but we'll deal with that later. Okay, here's the Barringer meteor crater in Arizona. Now this one came in sometime after the flood. Okay, so it formed here, and it's not filled with sediment. So this burrowed out a crater. This is about a half mile across here. I've been there and taken pictures. This is a drive where you come in. I was up in this region taking pictures, and this is in Arizona, the meteor crater here, the state of Arizona, the United States. Here's one of the pictures that I took of it. And this is a crater here. They had a little mine down in the crater where they were mining out of it, okay, mining things out of the crater. A number of lunar meteorites, let's talk about lunar meteorites on the moon, that is, and Earth's ice caps. A number of lunar meteorites have been found in the Antarctic ice caps. So what they found is they found meteorites that are pieces of the moon. So something impacted the moon and then was pulled away and pulled to the Earth and wound up in the ice that was deposited. Now, if the planet that caused the flood had ice rings and probably other particles besides ice, chunks of rock and other things in those rings, and it came close to the Earth, if it came so that the moon pulled some of it away, the far side of the moon would be impacted by these meteorites. And it could have impacted the far side of the moon as well as the near side. If it came between the moon and the Earth, parts of it could have been attracted away to the moon. And if it were, when it impacted the particles, the rocks and chunks of ice, impacted the moon, when they impacted the moon, it would break off pieces, and these pieces would be ejected. And then the planet that caused the flood, I believe it was Mercury, it's bigger than the moon, of course, its gravity and the Earth's gravity could pull those particles toward the Earth. Now, if the planet Mercury moved away from the Earth, as I believe it would in the process, then the Earth would wind up catching most of the particles that were ejected from the moon. So the planet then with the rings would have lost a lot of its crust. I'll postulate that as well. At present, these meteorites coming from lunar meteorites can be explained by pieces of ice rings being accelerated to the moon and dislodging parts of the moon upon impact. I believe that would explain how they got here from my model. These fragments of the moon were then accelerated toward the Earth and were mixed with the ice raining down through the windows of heavens. And this is a similar process to a child throwing a stone into a mud puddle and the mud splashes upon the face of the child. I mean, we've all done that when we were children. We threw something in the mud and then we got mud on our face. And so it's a very similar process. The physics of it's basically the same physics, okay? We have a limit called Roches Limit in planet fragmentation. Planets are held together by gravity. And what happens is if two planets get close enough, the larger planet will tear apart the smaller planet. And this is called the Roches Limit. In 1847, Roches showed a satellite in circular orbit around a central body that would be destroyed by tidal forces if it came closer to the central body than a certain limit, the so-called Roches Limit. And so we'll look at that in just a minute. This is Incranez, Bibbring, and Blanc, page 49. Roches Limit only applies to bodies that are large enough to have a gravity that would have sufficient force to fragment the rocks, the other body. The larger body would fragment the smaller body. And so the Earth being larger than Mercury, and I postulated that it was Mercury that was the planet, and I'll show further evidence of that later. But that Mercury was being smaller, it could only get within a certain distance or it would fragment it. So it wasn't the Earth. It wasn't within the Roches limit. The smaller body is fragmented by the larger body. Some astrophysicists think that this megaliths produce the rings of planets. So it's one theory that planets, small planetoid gets close enough and it fragments due to Roches limit. The tidal forces. Whenever we have tides in the moon, we've already shown that it causes water tides in the oceans, but it also causes solid tides or land tides. We've shown that as well. We've documented that. And this house where I'm in right now rises about 20 inches every day, but all the all the neighborhood around me rises the same amount. We never notice it, but it rises and falls due to the tides. There's tides in the magma, in the tides in the rocks, in the solid tides, land tides. But there's also tides in the atmosphere too, but we've talked about that as well. But the tides, the tidal forces then will tear apart the smaller planetoid or body if it's within the Roches Limit. Saturn has at least 2 moons that have probably been fragmented, possibly by this mechanism. That's the theory, present theory about Saturn's 2 of its moons that were fragmented. A team of astronomers have confirmed that 2 small satellites of Saturn may be nothing more than collections of icy rubble. Moons in question, Janus and Epimetheus, lie just beyond the planet's main rings. This now seems clear that a regularly shaped Janus, 220 by 160 kilometers in size, a kilometer is about 0.6 of a mile, and Epimetheus, 140 by 100 kilometers, really are highly porous objects. Now, they may be equally true of Atlas, Prometheus, and Pandora, which also skirt Saturn's main rings. It's possible that all 3 moonlets originated as coagulation of icy chunks inside the rings, maybe where they came from. Today's formula here is his formula. The Roches limit is 2 times r times r, little r sub p over r sub s. And the p would be the planet and s would be the satellite, the radius of them, and 1/3 to the 1/3 power. So this should be a cube root, basically. Roches limit, planetary radius, r sub p is the density of the planet, and r sub s is the density of the satellite. I said radius, but that's the density, I'm sorry. Following values are used in this formula. The density of the Earth is, average density is 5.5. The density of pure water being 1. Density of Mercury is 5.44. And the density of the moon, our moon, is 3.33. Now, ice has a density of 0.99. It's a little less dense than water, that's why it floats. The radius of the Earth is 6,378 kilometers. The radius of Mercury is 2,439 kilometers. Radius of our moon is 1,738 kilometers. Now, this, where I've done the math on it, we take Mercury, the moon, and an ice moonlet. An ice moonlet. The Roches limit between the Earth and Mercury be 16,000 kilometers. Again, kilometers about 0.6 of a mile. It's 1,000 meters. A meter is 39.37 inches. Okay. And of course, comparing Mercury to itself, it doesn't apply, but the Roches limit between Mercury and the moon was 7,000 kilometers, 7,181 kilometers. That Mercury then would fragment our moon. The moon and the Earth is 18,847 kilometers, Roches limit. And of course, Mercury is 7,181, just like we had up here. And comparing the moon to itself was not applicable. An ice moonlet would have a Roches limit of 28,000 kilometers with the Earth, and it would fragment. And with Mercury, it'd be 10,000 kilometers. With our moon, it would be 6,490 kilometers. That would be Roches limit. That's where it would fragment. Now, look at this. I would argue then that the planet Mercury, which I theorize was the cause of the flood, the breaking of the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven, that is, that Mercury could not have come closer than 16,000 kilometers from the Earth. Otherwise, it would have fragmented. So it was further away than that distance. The history of the moon, especially in its early stages, is punctuated by large-scale catastrophic events. Now, each of the larger crater-forming impacts threw debris at high velocity for hundreds of kilometers from the crater. By far, the most catastrophic lunar events were the impacts that formed large basins. Rocks surrounding the basin are strongly deformed into large faulted mountain blocks. So the moon was heavily cratered at this time, I believe, by perhaps even pieces of the surface of Mercury, but certainly by chunks of material from the rings. And so it was impacted or cratered. Now, many craters that are less than 150 kilometers in diameter, that's a pretty good sized crater, display a mountain or cluster of mountains, sometimes in the form of a ring, rising from the floor of the crater. But between 150 and kilometers, 300 kilometers, there are always either central mountains or a ring of mountains within the crater. So this is Guest and Greeley. Now, whatever this is, we need to, our model needs to at least conform to these presence of these craters and the mountains around them. I don't think there's a problem. I think the cratering would explain it, and probably would be the same explanation the atheist would give. First, they admit the moon was shaped by catastrophic events, not uniformitarian events. I want you to notice that. So uniformitarianism is put aside here by these atheists. Burgess agrees with this point. Undoubtedly, there's some kind of terminal cataclysmic bombardment of the moon. This is another source, and these are reputable books here. They link the mountains with the craters. So the mountains were formed by the craters or during the formation of the craters. The impact of both cosmic ice, temperature of about 459 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, 273 degrees below zero Celsius, and debris from the crust of Mercury that was ejected from impacts would have formed the mountains on the moon. Also, this could have melted the material and formed it up in the crater as well. This violent period of about 150 days of incessant bombardment of the moon by chunks of ice would have left large numbers of impact craters. Now, most of the impact craters would be on the side facing the Earth, not the side facing the moon. So the number of impact craters would be different on the two sides of the moon. Now, if debris just coming from space would have formed it, there should be more craters on the far side of the moon, the side not facing the Earth. The moon keeps its same face to the Earth at all times. So when it rotates around the Earth, the moon rotates one revolution. For every one revolution it goes around the Earth, it's locked in sync, like a synchronous orbit. And so this would have left large numbers of impact craters, but they should have been on the far side of the moon, not the near side. But they're on the near side. So it must have been something between the Earth and the moon that would form our planetary model. It would conform to my model. We have gravitational anomalies, and that's an anomaly is something that doesn't go by the normal rules. Actually, it's a word for no law. It doesn't follow the laws that we normally see. Associated with the large lunar basins such as Mare Imbrium and Mare Serenitatis. Mare, and the word mare is the Latin word for an ocean or sea, were discovered unfilled or partially flooded basins such as Mare Oriental. Orient is to the east, have less dense material within them. So now there's something interesting. These have materials that have a less density. So there's an anomaly of gravity. Gravity is formed by partly by distance and partly by the density of the materials. The more dense the material is, the stronger its gravity is. So that's what they mean by gravitational anomalies. The satellites, when they're going above the planet, the moon circling around it. Even the Earth has gravitational anomalies. As it goes above a spot that's real dense, it will dip down, and then it goes to a spot that's less dense, it'll go higher up. Let's just say this is a spot that's more dense. The satellite going around will go down, and it'll come back up if it goes to a region that's less dense over here. And the satellites will move up and down. And they can measure them, and satellites on the Earth do this as well. They can find spots that are more or less dense. This less dense material might be the result of sublimation of cosmic ice that it was embedded, and there might even still be ice there underneath it. Yeah. They know there's large amounts of ice. If these anomalies, according to Burgess, have a greater gravitational attraction, could be explained the impact of cosmic ice. It quickly solidified the dense material before it flowed down after the impact. Or it might be just chunks of the planet Mercury, which we saw earlier in one of the tables is more dense than the moon. So that's a possibility as well. There's a moon probe called Clementine. Clementine's improved maps of lunar topography. And topos is the word land, graphe is the writing. That's two Greek words. And gravity paint a more complicated picture. For example, topographic profiles across the large near-side basins show that the mare basalts, that's a form of rock that's formed by volcanic action, on their floors are only thick enough to account for about 20% of the associated mascons. Now, at some basins, and some basins exhibit gravity highs, even though little mare material appears inside them. Apparently, the major basin forming impacts caused huge mounds of relatively dense mantle to bow upward, then freeze in place before gravity could restore equilibrium. Now, if this material was liquid, it would have flowed downhill pretty quickly, but if it had large chunks of ice, real cold ice, it could have cooled it off. A mascon is oriented to high density regions below the surface of a lunar marea. Marea would be like the mares, the oceans, the seas. They call them seas. They look like a sea, and that are held perturbed. Perturb is to make it change the motion of a spacecraft. The spacecraft is going over this area will go up and down a little bit. Just move up and down as it goes over the less dense and more dense gravitational areas. That's what they mean. These discoveries made by the Clementine probe can be easily explained by cosmic ice freezing and solidifying the mare basalts. The basalts are rocks that have become molten and they solidify. Scientists have theorized other explanations of these anomalies, but their explanations have problems. But this would certainly explain it. Similar anomalies exist on the Earth, and the most reasonable explanation for both sets of anomalies that they were caused by the same mechanism. And so I would theorize that the same mechanism caused them. Here's lunar craters, and some of them that were found. And what we have, they're named after certain explorers. This is, I believe, a Norwegian Antarctic or Arctic explorer. I can't remember. I think it was Antarctic. And we have these are named after famous people, famous scientists is what they named them after. These are areas. Here's gravitational anomalies on the Earth. And so we have Earth's gravity field anomalies. And so we have areas where it's more, the gravity is stronger, and then areas where it's weaker. And the different colors show the changes in the values, the anomalies of the fields. The milligals, the red regions, is a stronger gravity, and the blue is the least strong gravity. Right. So we have areas where the gravity is less. It's more here. Of course, these are mountain ranges, of course, but the gravity is affected even by mountain ranges. Interestingly enough, over here, some of this is ocean, but it's very high gravity. So there must be material in here in this region that makes it more dense to give that stronger gravity. Okay. Some of these are under the surface of the ocean. But the red is stronger. There's a present claim that the mammoths were killed by the impact of a comet. And that's a claim, that's one claim that's made, that they were killed by the impact of a comet. This theory has come under extensive opposition from a number of scientists. But anyhow, this was one of the theories. Of course, they were frozen quickly. We'll see this. This theory may have some truth in the theory. Only time will tell. We have to look at it. But I would say there's some evidence that it was supported. Here's a Davy chain. This is a series of craters that are lined up in a row. This is on the moon called the Davy chain. D-A-V-Y on the moon right here. This crater, big crater, and then little ones that follow it up, craters, all lined up in a row. Now we have the Davy chain with its 23 craters in a line 47 kilometers long. That would be maybe 35 miles or somewhere thereabouts. Has long puzzled astronomers. The chain does not point toward any large crater in the individual craters, which range from 1 to 3 kilometers in diameter, better defined than standard secondary craters. So they can't figure them out. But if this was from material from a ring coming in, then it could be lined up in a line like that, as those cratered pieces of a ring of the planet Mercury as it circled the Earth, and these debris from it were in a ring lined up. That would explain the Davy chain on the moon. We see a line of 8 circular geologic features that stretches from northern and southern Illinois to eastern Kansas. We got this in the Earth as well. We mark where a fragmented comet or asteroid struck Earth. The craters going to Rampino and Volk actually show signs of an impact origin. These include central uplifts, highly shocked quartz grains, and extensive shattering of local rocks. That's what you'd get if a large chunk of material struck the surface of the Earth. Shocked quartz grains and extensive shattering of local rocks, uplifts, and so forth. That would occur, like we saw earlier in Arizona, the crater there. Now, so we have this a line of them on the Earth as well, from southern Illinois to Kansas. Shaw states cyclic reservoir may have been dumped progressively and almost completely over a period of months, following a major perturbation by a newly captured meteoroid, a massive close encounter, atmospheric grazing flyby, or an internal chaotic crisis, that is, by tidal modulation of sensitive resonance states. Now, this would fit in. We have the craters on the Earth. He's trying to explain them on the Earth, and so there's the explanation of them. Shaw also says, in terms of the craters on the Earth, a freight train-like procession of intermittently clustered low-angle impacts. So they come in at low angles and could have traversed the region of Wolf's fossil site, but straddled it and others like it in leapfrog manner with loaded catastrophic effects of a multiple sequence of impacts releasing an immense cumulative impact energy. Now I realize I'm reading this, but you have to follow it and see this. This is very important. He's trying to explain the various craters on the Earth. And we're going to look at those craters just a little more thoroughly. Such a globe encircling multiple events. So these craters circle the Earth. And that's exactly what my model theorizes. The planet with ice rings would be cratering it as it went around the Earth. It was losing part of its rings. Such a globe encircling multiple event would have created several large craters and many smaller ones, where any one of the latter might be interpreted as a single small impact, but was really but one crater among many produced from the tail end of a procession of these objects that was retained at some period of time in geocentric orbits. So it was circling the Earth, geocentric. Geo is Earth, the Greek word for Earth, and centric, of course, the Earth is the center of that orbit. So it's orbiting around the Earth. And my model has the planet Mercury, and I believe it was Mercury, circling the Earth 3 or 3.5 passes. And as it went around about 3.5 times, it went by it once, back around, and on the third pass around it, it went a half pass around. So it went 3.5 passes around the Earth. And during this time, it was pelting the Earth with its rings. Each time it got a little closer to the Earth, and it was ejected finally out of the orbit of the Earth. Now, we showed this was probably have taken about 150 days for this to occur. Now, I've studied the geographical, Shaw says, and temporal distribution of the known impact craters on the Earth, finding, contrary to common belief, but in accord with nonlinear dynamic prediction, that it is not random. It's not a random process. My re-examination of the cratering record reveals the persistence over time of at least 3 spatially invariant clusters of craters. That's exactly what I see here. The planet Mercury, in order to get away from the Earth, would have circled it about 50-day cycles, approximately. And then it would have been pulled away at the end of 150 days. So there's 3 spatially invariant clusters of craters. So we have 3 sets of craters that are ring around the Earth. They go all the way around the Earth. Instead of seeing craters spread randomly among all continents, Monastersky says, he discerned 3 distinct clusters in North America, Eurasia, and Australia. So there's 3 distinct clusters of craters in these three regions. And again, my model has the planet circling the Earth about 3 passes once and back around. And so it goes, I believe, 3.5 times around the Earth. This is in harmony with my contention that the planet that caused the flood made 3 or 4 passes, probably 3.5 actually, revolutions around the Earth. Linear crater chains. Did tidal disruption cause the Davy-chain craters? Let's see that. Linear crater chains of Ganymede and Callisto apparently provide an impact record of tidally disrupted bodies like Comet Shoemaker. Levy 9 at Jupiter, we propose that the Davy crater chain on the Earth's moon records a similar tidal disruption event on the Earth in the Earth's moon system. Now, this is Wickman and Wood, and they're theorizing that this Davy chain was formed by disruption of the Earth's moon system. Something disrupted it. And I would argue that it would have been the planet Mercury that disrupted it. These are published in various high-powered journals now. Most lunar crater chains result from either volcanism or secondary impacts. But the Davy chain differs in setting and appearance from these crater chains, and instead shows morphologic similarities to the Jovian crater chain. Jovian would be the Jovian planets would be Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, which the Davy chain is much smaller than the Jovian chains. While it is, the Jovian planets are the big gaseous planets. The tidal disruption models indicate that the smaller size is consistent with the Earth's lower mass. Again, there was tidal disruption causing this to occur, exactly what my model says. Now, cosmic ice gives the best explanation of the physical phenomena observed in nature that is in harmony with the intent of God, universal destruction. Evident that God brought a planetary body with ice rings close to the Earth. The ice rings of the planet were deposited symmetrically around the magnetic poles of the Earth, as we've already laid out, because the magnetic nature of ice. Polar ice caps cannot be explained by uniformitarian geologic assumptions. We've already given evidence of that in a prior lesson. The ice caps had evidence of having been deposited very quickly have been extremely cold and are likely from space because of that. These ice caps are implicitly linked with the flood. Ice coming in would have triggered the water to fall, the 40 days of rain to occur. That would lower the barometric pressure and, of course, remove the particles, the ice, the water from the upper atmosphere, as we have water vapor canopy. Planetary rings, composed mostly of ice, give an excellent explanation for the impact craters on the Earth. These craters would be arranged in clusters and would tend to follow a pattern as the planet that caused the flood circle the Earth. There would be a transfer of angular momentum, and interaction of the magnetic fields affected the location of the ice in the craters. Transfer of angular momentum would also spin the planet off from the Earth. Now, I want you to notice something else about this. If we take the flood to have deposited the vast majority of the sedimentary rock, if that's true, if we hold that view, we have a problem if we don't take my model. Because the problem is we have these impact craters in the sediment. Some of these craters, like in near Ames, Oklahoma, are several thousand feet down in the earth. But the craters down there, they've measured it, found it. They drilled down and found it. And they've found it with seismographs. And so we know these craters are there, but they've been filled with sedimentary rock. Now, how did that occur? This crater, we have craters and we have sedimentary rock. We have more craters on top of the sedimentary rock and then more craters, 3 rings of them. And these craters were filled with sedimentary rock. They must have been deposited during the flood to be filled with sedimentary rock. So we have 3 layers of these craters. The deepest ones would be the first pass. Second pass would give you some more. They would fill up with sedimentary rock. And then the third pass would give you some more that would be filled with sedimentary rock. Now, the crater out in Arizona, Beringer Meteorite Crater, that I went to and took pictures of, that crater was formed after the flood, and that was debris that came back, and pieces of it that came back and hit the Earth after the flood. So this is my explanation of it. Hope that's been helpful to you. Do you have any questions? Okay. We will